Alright guys, welcome back to the fourth video of the Unit 3 Outcome 3 series. Key knowledge for technology strategies. Okay, so here is our study design and here is the key knowledge dot point. You can see there's a bit to it. Strategies to improve both the efficiency and effectiveness of operations related to technological developments, including the use of, and then it lists 6 specific technologies. So this is one where we have a very definite script. Now, I am just going to point out that, and I've mentioned this in class, that if you look at the next 3 dot points after this one, they kind of look very similar. All of them start with strategies to improve both the efficiency and the effectiveness of operations related to, but then it focuses on some different areas. Okay, so this video, the first one, we're talking about technological developments. The next video, we're going to talk about materials, then quality, and then waste minimization. But really, we're going to go through the exact same process for each of these 4. And the bulk of the questions in Saxon exams tends to be focused around these 4 key knowledge dot points. Not to say that you don't need to understand, obviously, the other ones, both before and after it, but the majority of the content here really is, in this outcome, is from these 4. So just to kind of summarize, again, kind of looking forward here. So this is just breaking down that study design, or those 4 key knowledge dot points from the study design that focus on the strategies to optimize operations. So you can see the 4 there. I've just kind of simplified them and put them in lists. So what you can see basically is across those 4 areas, technology, materials, quality, and waste minimization, there's 14 strategies that you need to know about, which you can be questioned on specifically, and which you can use in your responses to questions around optimizing operations. So 14, so it's quite a bit of content. But as we go through these, you will notice kind of quite a bit of repetition. So while there's kind of a lot of content, a lot of it you kind of use multiple times, and you'll kind of see that in play a bit, even as we just go through these technology strategies. So although you make a lot of notes, there's going to be some repetition, and there's the opportunity maybe once you've made your notes to kind of re-summarize them in a way that's going to make them a little bit easier to learn. That will make more sense as we go through this video. So first off, technology strategies. Okay, what do we mean? Okay, technology, not surprisingly, a huge influence on business operations in recent years. Well, really, always. Technology is always advancing. Okay, technology is always moving on. In this context, what do we mean by technology? The equipment and the knowledge available to assist a business to function more efficiently and or more effectively. Developments in technology might lead to new methods of production being introduced, new equipment being used to speed up or lower the cost of production, basically. And as we go through this video, you'll see lots of examples of the types of technology that we're talking about. Now, technology can be very, very expensive to implement and also to maintain, but certainly to implement, to install in the short term. And a business needs to weigh up the potential improvements in productivity, the efficiency, or the potential gains in effectiveness, improvements in quality that can actually result from that implementation. But the reality is, any business that fails to keep up with the latest advances in technology, like in their industry, is quickly going to lose competitiveness and risks ultimately going out of business. And just a few examples of businesses there, which I'm not sure if they all completely don't exist anymore, but look, history is littered with examples of businesses which once were very successful and either no longer exist or exist now in a much smaller form than they once did because they failed to keep up with the technological developments that applied in their industry. And in a couple of minutes, I'll talk to you about Blockbuster just to give you kind of an example of that. Now, there's a little star there just to refer you to here. So basically what I'm saying is you there's technology available in your industry that you could implement. So what you need to do is do a cost benefit analysis to see if it's actually worth installing this technology or implementing and using it. Okay, what you need to do is work out how much it's going to cost to implement, and then work out what the savings ultimately that is going to lead to. And if the savings, the long-term savings, exceed the cost of implementation and maintaining the technology, then the business decision would be to implement the technology. But if not, then that's a technology you might want to leave behind. So you do what's called a cost benefit analysis. There's lots of versions of this in business. You do this a lot, but this is something you would definitely do in relation to the implementation of technology. Just an example of that, just so you can kind of visualize what I'm talking about. That is a aircraft wing, and the upsweep at the end there is what's called a wingtip. Okay, so if you're familiar with planes, familiar with flying, most of the planes you're going to see these days have those wingtips on the end, this upward sweep. Okay, winglets rather, aircraft winglets. Now, what they do is reduce fuel consumption on some aircraft by as much as 5%. Okay, it doesn't sound like a huge deal. Because of the way that the airflow kind of flows around there, it means the aircraft flies through the air kind of more efficiently. Now, new aircraft are likely to come with them already installed, but some of the airlines have actually retrofitted them to a lot of their older aircraft as well. Now, the reality is that airlines keep aircraft in service for 20 to 30 years often, sometimes even more. Now, this is a relatively recent technology, so if you're running aircraft of that age, they wouldn't have come with them. Now, fuel is one of the biggest expenses for an airline, 30% of their total operating cost on average, possibly in recent times even more because fuel is more expensive than what it was. So either way, a huge, huge expense for an airline. So anything that an airline can do to reduce the amount of fuel that they're using, a 5% saving on all of that over a number of years can be savings in the many, many millions and millions of dollars, okay? So what's the airlines have to ask themselves when they're thinking about retrofitting this technology to older aircraft is, will the cost savings made offset the cost of fitting them? Okay, that's a cost benefit analysis. And with each aircraft, you might think, well, this aircraft, we're only going to be using this aircraft, it's only going to be in service for another 5 years. And you might work out that the cost of implementing those winglets is more than the savings in fuel for that particular aircraft. But if an aircraft has many, many years of service, then you might decide that it's worth to do. Hopefully you get the idea. Now, going back to some businesses that have suffered or no longer exist because they didn't keep up with technology. Look, Blockbuster, just a quick sort of summary, just so you've got an example. This is not necessarily something you would use in an answer, I don't think, but just to give you an idea of what can happen, just so you understand the kind of severity or the implications of businesses not keeping up to date with all of this sort of stuff. Okay, so let's go back to the 1990s. Look, Blockbuster, there's some key information for you, some key stats. Okay, basically a very, very big, very, very successful business. Okay, been going for a number of years. Fast forward a decade or so from there, and Blockbuster ceased to exist, okay? Filed for bankruptcy with over $900 million US in debt. So what happened to Blockbuster? Netflix happened, okay? 1997, Netflix launched the world's first online DVD rental store. 30 employees, 925 titles, okay? So very, very small. Okay, but that was at the time almost the entire catalogue of DVDs that were available in print. They did it different to Blockbuster, the pay per rent model with rates and due dates that were very similar to Blockbuster. So the cost to the customer was very similar to what Blockbuster were doing, but the method of delivery was different. Then in 1999, Netflix introduced the monthly subscription concept rather than the per title rental model. So in other words, you pay, I think it was like $10 per month, and then you could rent as many titles as you wanted. So instead of paying like $3 per title, so it kind of became cheaper to the customer. Now, in 2000, Netflix offered themselves up to be sold to Blockbuster for $50 million, okay? Their idea being that Blockbuster would continue what they were doing and Netflix would become Blockbuster.com, and they would start moving into the streaming model. So the streaming technology was starting to become a thing at that time. Okay, but basically it seemed like a good synergy between the two businesses. The two, Blockbuster could buy Netflix, they could run the two models and then move into streaming over the coming years. Blockbuster turned down that offer to buy Netflix for $50 million. And then in 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy. Basically, they didn't believe that the whole streaming thing was going to be a thing. And they decided they were going to continue along the path that they were traveling, with the bricks and mortar, people going in and renting DVDs, so on and so forth. Come forward 13 years, Netflix has been worth up to 225 billion US dollars. Okay. And I say up to because the share price changes, which means pretty much on a daily basis, the price is kind of fluctuating. But at its highest, I think around 2021, 2022, it was worth $225 billion. A 4,500% increase from when Blockbuster could have actually bought them for $50 million. That would have been one of the best investments in business history. Instead, they disappeared. Okay, so just goes to show, a huge business doing very, very well, operating everywhere, can disappear relatively quickly if they don't keep up to date with the technology. And it was streaming that Blockbuster, they missed a trick there. Okay, so come back to technology strategies. Look, just some examples, and we'll be looking at a few more in some more detail, but this is the sort of thing we're talking about. Okay, these huge robots, that's a car making plant. This is an Amazon warehouse, which these days, the Amazon warehouses are largely speaking run with technology. There are little robots there which go along and pick the goods. Technology even involves point of sale equipment in any business. Your Coles and your Woolies, the automated checkouts that were introduced many years ago now, but that was an example of a technology that was implemented into a business. And then later on, airline automated check-ins. That's a much more recent thing than in the supermarkets. And now even Macca's, you go and you can order your food via these screens instead of going and doing it at the registers. Google Classroom, a technology that's been implemented in education around the world. So technology, you can see, takes lots and lots of different forms. So let's get back to the study design. There were 6 technologies which are specifically mentioned. These are the ones that you need to basically be able to, first off, describe the strategy, then come up with some advantages and disadvantages of implementing that technology. And lastly, because of the way study design was worded, it mentioned the impact on the effectiveness and the efficiency of operations, or the other way around. So those are the things we're going to cover with each of these technologies. Okay, and that's really the focus of this one. Describe the strategy, disadvantages and advantages, and the impact on efficiency and effectiveness. Okay, so automated production lines, and I've got there the Yakult, which most of us are now familiar with. That is a classic example of an automated production line. Now, automation, a couple of definitions for you here. Separate these two things out. Automation, replacement of human effort by machines and technology. And that itself has resulted from advances in technology, such as engineering, mechanics, hydraulics, electronic, computer advancements. So automation itself has been driven by changes in technology. Now, an automated production line, which is the one the study design actually mentions. So the automated production line, series of workstations. Each station performs a specific operation, and the product then moves on step by step to the next station in a predefined production sequence. Each workstation is linked to the next, and the product moves along the production line. So again, just think back to your Yakult, makes it very, very simple to visualize. That is your automated production line. So there's a couple of definitions there for you to learn. Now, the requirement for labor as an input in the operation system is significantly reduced with an automated production line. So again, think back to your Yakult. We really only saw 2, 3, maybe 4 people down on those factory floors. And largely they were kind of there doing actually quality control and running the machinery through computers, which we see a little bit later, you don't see many people. And again, you go back a number of generations and that would have been very, very different. But these days, it is all run via automated production lines. So the human role is reduced to system design, making adjustments to the equipment as they're operating, and then supervising and monitoring, rather than controlling the system directly. And that's what we saw those 2 or 3 people down on the factory floor doing at Yakult. Here is a couple of pictures of, this is from the 1950s, a car manufacturing line. So you can see lots and lots of people there involved. If you looked at a car manufacturing plant these days, now you're not going to see one of these in Australia because we no longer manufacture cars, certainly on this scale anymore. This is more what they look like. Again, you see these huge machines, these robots, these automated production lines, and again, you see very, very few people involved. Okay, just as a point of note, these production lines are very, very expensive to set up, to install. I don't think I asked at Yakult how much the lines would have cost. I don't think they even would have known, to be honest. But the typical car manufacturing production line that you see there in front of you can cost up to $8 billion. So hugely, hugely expensive thing to do. But again, we come back to the cost benefit analysis. Presumably, if car manufacturers are spending this kind of money on installing these production lines, they must see in the long run a benefit in terms of the savings in the costs involved in producing the cars. Okay, some advantages of automated production lines. I think this is all kind of largely pretty obvious. Higher production speeds and volumes achievable. Okay, and again, when we're talking about this is kind of, I guess, in relation to if you were using people instead of this technology. It can carry out dangerous and or boring tasks. So there's a lot of jobs which people used to do in factories which would be very repetitive, very boring. So a lot of those have now been removed and are carried out by technology. And the dangerous jobs, you don't want people being injured. And again, you go back many years, factories, there were a lot more injuries, even deaths, there would be now, just purely because we've removed people as much as possible from the operation. Reduction in labour costs, really that's what a lot of this is about. Over many, many years, you're saving millions and millions potentially in your wage bill. Another thing, that machines don't get sick, they don't need breaks, or they do take or don't take holidays like people do. Okay, so managing human resources, very, very complex. Humans are very complex. We looked at all that in the last outcome. Machines, kind of in this point, are much more straightforward. Greater precision, greater accuracy, and greater consistency in output than if people were producing. I think that makes sense. And a reduction in material waste. And that really comes from the point above. If there's greater precision, accuracy, and consistency, you're not going to be throwing as much stuff away, whether it be finished product or the byproducts of producing the thing, because there's less waste involved. Some disadvantages of your automated production lines. Already talked about this: development, setup costs, and then also ongoing maintenance costs can be huge, as we just said. The CSR, the corporate social responsibility implications associated with the removal of employment opportunities. Okay, so businesses can be seen kind of in a bad light from a CSR point of view if they are constantly, laying people off, making people redundant and replacing them with technology. At the end of the day, it's kind of the way the world is going, but still it can be an issue from a CSR point of view for a business. And of course, if people see a business negatively in that CSR kind of light, then that leads to a damage of the reputation, which leads to a decrease in sales and ultimately profit and all the rest of it. So it just needs to be managed carefully. And I've got in there in the orange a little example, Yakult. If you remember that robotic arm they had at the end of the production line, when they implemented that technology, which replaced, I think she said 4 or 5 people at one time, they actually redeployed those people rather than making them redundant, which is actually a really good way to do it, to manage that CSR. So you're still using the people just somewhere else. Not necessarily going to be possible on a really large scale. Like if you're making thousands of people redundant, you're not going to be able to redeploy all of them. But in your Colt's case, when we're only talking about a handful of people, it was possible to do. That's what they did. Third disadvantage, security threats potentially associated with hackers and viruses, because this is now all controlled via computers, so there is that risk. And finally, breakdowns can halt production entirely and be very, very expensive for the business. Now, whilst I said, if we go back to the advantages, I said they don't, machines don't get sick, don't need breaks, take holidays, but they do break down. I mean, ideally, if you're maintaining them as best as possible, that's going to be minimized, but there is always the chance that could happen. And I remember reading a few years ago stories. I think it was a BMW plant in Germany. Something had happened with part of their production line, and it had to shut down for a number of days. And every day that the production line was shut, and when I say shut, I mean the whole thing. Makes it, step by step by step. If something goes wrong somewhere, the whole thing ends. And it was costing them something like $50 million per day every time that the production line was not running. So there is a really, really important, I think, a key issue with automated production lines, the idea that breakdowns halt production entirely. Okay, moving on to technology strategy 2, robotics. Now, I have to be honest, I'm not really sure why they separate this one out from automated production lines. Robotics are kind of often a part of, not always, but usually, but really the two technologies are very, very similar. The advantages and disadvantages, as we'll see shortly, are very, very similar. I'm not sure why they kind of have two separate ones here. To me, they should have been lumped in together, but because they are mentioned separate in the study design, you do need to kind of compartmentalize them in the notes and be able to describe them separately. But there is a lot of repetition here. Okay, so these are autonomous programmable machines controlled by computers capable of completing specialized tasks with a high degree of efficiency and precision. Okay, so there's a fairly specific definition of robotics for you. In terms of advantages and disadvantages, basically just go with the ones for automated production lines. They're the same things. Okay. I'm just going to show you here a little bit of a video of the Amazon robots in action. I think I showed a picture of these earlier in the video. This is just to give you a bit of an idea of them, what they actually do. So these are Amazon warehouses. Now they have at least one, maybe a couple by now in Australia, but they have these things all around. And this is basically where all the products that Amazon stock, they come to these huge warehouses. You can see they're stored in these, storage units. And when orders are made, I guess in the past you'd have people going and finding them, but now what you can see is a lot of this process is actually automated. Okay, so these machines go and they find the relevant section where whatever product has been chosen, has been sold, is stored. So the robot goes along and lifts the entire section and brings it out around the warehouse. You can see these things buzzing around all over the place. And again, these things are hugely, hugely expensive when they develop these things. So you can see these things whizzing all around the warehouses. Again, you can see no people here. Now here's where the people are. So they bring them to where the pickers are, and the computers tell him exactly what they're picking from which shelf. And then again, you can see they just whiz off and they're taken back to, you can see one disappearing there, and they're taken back to where they're originally stored. So very, very clever. And here's a robotic arm. Okay. So here's the robots picking up, a bit like your Colt. The robotic arm was used for the finally, packaging into the bigger boxes, so they can then be transported. So that's what you're seeing there. And again, look at that. I can see one human, no, maybe two. Hugely acres and acres of factory space, and all automated, and you can see a couple of robots in there as well. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. Okay, technology strategy 3, computer aided design. Okay, CAD. CAD is a term you may have heard of before, at least. Okay, so this is just software that streamlines the creation and the modification of product design. Okay, so this is about design, computer aided design. Okay, it's become standard in most manufacturing and design businesses. It speeds up the process of product design, increases accuracy. Again, like all of this technology, costly to introduce, but in the long run saves time and money. Also, the development of CAD means that technical documents can be produced 3 to 4 times faster than by using old school manual methods. It takes the tedium and the errors out of product design. These documents are more accurate, they're more flexible, they're more manageable. And another key point is they can be shared across locations instantly. So if someone's working on a CAD and they produce a design with CAD, within seconds, that can be seen by anyone anywhere in the world, obviously through email or other technologies, okay, which obviously in the past, if you're producing a physical drawing, could not happen. Now, CAD might be linked directly to the manufacturing process using CAM, computer-aided manufacturing, which is the next technology strategy we'll look at. And also product specifications can also be passed on to the CAM systems of subcontractors and suppliers. So in other words, the business can actually design the product themselves using CAD, but they might then decide to not manufacture themselves. So for example, we know that much of the stuff that we buy in Australia is made in other countries because the cost base in those countries is lower, so it's cheaper to do it that way. So it might be designed in Australia, but then the CAD and the specifications go up to a factory in China, for example, wherever it might be, and the actual manufacturing happens up there. So all of this stuff can happen, obviously, much more efficiently once it's all done via computers. Just some examples, nothing rocket science here, just some examples of CAD designs and technical specifications for you, just so you can kind of visualize in your head CAD, what we're talking about here. Now some advantages, again, kind of touched on these really when we were describing it, but greater accuracy in the design process, so therefore high degree of consistency and quality in our output. The sophistication of the software allows for more complex designs than what were once possible through manual processes. Flexibility for designs to be modified to meet customer needs. So we're talking about customization here. And again, speeds up the design process. Disadvantages, again, so I said things get a bit repetitive, and they do as we go through these technologies. The CSR issues associated with redundancies, if the software, the CAD software does actually result in that. Again, CAD software can be very expensive, might need to be constantly updated and maintained. So again, there's costs associated with that. And also costs associated with training employees to use the software. I guess we didn't actually put that in the previous category, but that would also actually apply to automated production lines and robotics as well, potentially as well. Okay, technology strategy 4, CAM. So I already sort of touched on this in the last one. This is about controlling the machinery, tools, and equipment through the use of a computer. So machines are fed programmed instructions from a central computer, allows for greater precision and less margin for error. And it also reduces the need for manual resetting machines, which again saves on time and labor costs. So using CAM, large sections of production can be controlled with greater efficiency, far fewer errors, and far less staff. Time is saved, fewer mistakes is made. Pretty simple. Something like you see here. In fact, when you think back to your Colt, certainly when I was looking down in the bottling section, there was something that looked a lot like that, and there was a lady that was there that was typing some stuff into the screen. So that was the example of your Colt of the CAM being used for that particular production line. Okay, now the advantages, disadvantages. Again, I'm not going to separate them out. They're becoming quite repetitive. Again, improved accuracy and consistency. Most of these technologies that's a huge advantage. Higher quality, removal of tedious, dangerous tasks, speeding up the process, reduction in labour expenses. Again, all of that stuff. We've seen it before. Disadvantage, again, redundancies. Breakdowns, again, lead into production halts. The setup, the update and the maintenance cost, training costs. So again, like I said, we're getting repetitive here. So although you've got lots of 6 different technologies with advantages and disadvantages, the reality is that once you've got your notes, you could probably kind of squish these down, because a lot of these advantages and disadvantages apply to multiple of these technologies. The fifth one, a little bit different here, and this is the brand new one on the study design, artificial intelligence. Maybe not surprisingly, we all know this is becoming huge in the world today. So AI deals with the development of software that imitates and simulates human intelligence and behavior. Okay, the aim is to create systems that can act as an aid to humans, and then allows those machines to function with a human-like intelligence. Okay, so in other words, this leads to machines that can actually carry out tasks that humans would otherwise have to do. The human aspects that they are actually simulating are things like learning from past experience, problem solving, and understanding language. So they're 3 key areas that AI these days is focused on, and that's why it is becoming so very clever. By 2023, AI is already being extensively used across a range of industries: banking, healthcare, retail, logistics, government even. And it's already been successfully integrated into many, many large-scale manufacturing businesses around the world. And I guess with a lot of technologies, as it kind of becomes more, as it's developed further and becomes more ingrained, I guess the costs kind of come down a bit. So it's now becoming increasingly accessible to smaller businesses rather than just the larger businesses as well. Just an example of a use in financial services, banks are now using AI to quickly and accurately detect fraudulent activity on accounts. They're replacing employees with AI to process loan applications online and even provide financial advice to customers. AI-based chatbots are being used in the insurance industry to improve customers' experience and even create insurance plans based on a customer's data. Now, taking that even further, I mean, I've not got it there, but a lot of websites now, if you go on and it's a business website, once you go onto the website, often you get a little chat bot come up in a corner, and often it's got a human face and it's, "Hi, my name's John. How can I help you today?" Something like that. Little window, and there's a little space for you to chat questions. I generally just click on a little cross and close it down. And I guess, look, because it's got a face and it's, it says my name is whatever, people think that they're actually talking. There's somebody actually at the other end, interacting with you, because you can ask questions and it comes up with answers. And it does feel like you're interacting with a human. But that's not the case. These are now chatbots. This is artificial intelligence running the other end. You're not actually dealing with a human. You could do this at midnight, 1 a.m, 2. It doesn't matter what time you go onto the website. They don't have people working 24 hours a day chatting with customers. This is AI that you're interacting with, but it's very, very cleverly done so that a lot of people would be fooled into thinking they're actually communicating with a human being at the other end, but not the case. Again, advantages and disadvantages, very, very similar to before. So you could go back to those lists and think which ones are going to be applicable. But there are a couple of extra advantages specific to AI that I would focus on. The ability to provide fast and efficient customer service 24 hours a day. Again, like I just said, through those chatbots. The ability to process data more quickly and with more precision than humans would otherwise be able to do. But other than that, the advantages and disadvantages really pretty much the same. If you look to those lists, you understand what we're talking about with this AI, you would be able to translate across the ones which also apply to this particular technology. And the final technology, strategy 6, online services. Definition-wise, online service refers to any information or service that a business offers over the internet And here are some examples there: online booking platforms, price comparison platforms, obviously online shopping itself, lots and lots of different things, you know, and there's probably other examples as well that I don't have. Businesses, other than running their own via their own website, they can also now utilize third-party online services, such as a restaurant using Uber Eats. So you might be able to order directly from the restaurant, or you can order via Uber Eats. Or a lot of restaurants might not actually have their own online delivery service. They just use a third party, such as Uber Eats. And there's some examples here. The My Macca's app is an example of obviously online food. But you could, I think, you can also order McDonald's through Uber Eats and other platforms as well. So it gives the customer multiple options of how they want to kind of carry out. Now, I'm just going to talk for a minute here about e-commerce. It's not mentioned specifically in the study design, but I think it's a term that it's important to understand what it means. I think probably a lot of you do already anyway, but it's also the sort of term that might crop up in some case information, and I don't want it to throw you, okay? And also just to put some context around e-commerce, to kind of show why online services, and I said that AI was a new one to study design. Online services also relatively new in study design. It wasn't, I'm not even sure if it was in the last study design, it might have been. It certainly wasn't in the ones before that, whereas the other technologies were. Just to explain why these have now become a thing and how important they are in business today. So first of all, e-commerce itself is just simply the selling of products or services to customers through the internet, rather than, you know, through the traditional physical bricks and mortar shopfront, other more traditional channels. Simply selling stuff via the internet. That's all e-commerce is, okay? So just putting some context and some statistics. You don't need to know this stuff. You're not going to be asked to regurgitate this stuff, but just so you kind of get more of a feel, more of an understanding of why this is so important in business today. Okay, so 2013, Australians spent $26 billion via e-commerce. Okay, by 2023, that had almost tripled to around $70 billion, and it's still growing hugely year on year on year. And in fact, that $26 billion, look, Australia was pretty slow to come to the party with e-commerce compared with most other developed nations. If you look at America, look at Europe, even by then, taking population aside, if we divided it by head of population, you would see that Americans and Europeans, even by 2013, and certainly now, would be way ahead of these numbers. Australia, for some reason, were kind of slow on the uptake of this stuff. But you can see it's in 10 years, kind of tripled, becoming more and more important every year. In Australia, 2022, 53% of internet users bought goods or services online. That's quite surprising to me. That's a huge number. 21% of users bought groceries online. That also surprised me. That's a pretty big number. I guess maybe that kind of exploded a little bit during COVID, and some people have just kind of maintained doing that way, possibly. I'm not sure. 19% of customers consulted a price comparison website before making a purchase. Something I do every time if I'm making larger purchases. So if I'm booking flights, holidays, if I'm buying my car insurance, you know, the larger purchases that we make, I tend to use price comparison websites before I make the purchase to get myself the best deal, basically, that I can. Okay, some advantages are online services. Orders can be placed quickly, conveniently, and accurately, therefore increasing customer appeal. Pretty straightforward. Services such as the price comparison platforms allows a business to highlight their competitiveness alongside those of their competitors. So, for example, if they are a price leader in their industry, then you see their price compared to right on the same screen, right next to the price of the competitors. So it really highlights that price competitiveness that they have. Or it might be that price isn't their competitive edge, but something else they offer. And again, you're basically seeing your offerings alongside your competitors, and it allows you to highlight very clearly why customers should buy from you as opposed to those other competitors. Possible increased job satisfaction for staff who've some of the more tedious and boring tasks removed from their workloads, because now The websites are doing that, they're taking the orders, so on and so forth. Potential to make more bookings and faster bookings than employees are able to do. And exposure to new markets, potential extra sales. And there's different ways to look at the new markets, but a very, very simple way of it is to look at, take, for example, a bricks and mortar store in, say, Greensboro Plaza, for example. Okay, it's selling some kind of non-perishable good, so a physical, tangible product that is going to last a long time. It's not going to perish. Now, if you go back, I don't know, 20, 30 years, your customers realistically are people that are going to be coming into Greensboro Plaza. So in other words, the locals from the Greensboro and surrounds areas. Okay. Now, maybe if the product that you were selling was a little bit more specialized, maybe high end, and not something that could be bought just kind of anywhere, it might encourage people to travel from other parts of Melbourne because, you were a specialized shop, but certainly probably no further than that. You weren't going to be selling probably to people around Australia even. Now that physical shop can either operate a website which they sell directly from, or use Amazon or eBay as a virtual shop front to sell their products. And now all of a sudden your market is potentially anybody anywhere in the world. Okay, very, very easy to do. So hugely, hugely exposes you to new customers, new markets that at one time, pre-online services, you weren't able to access. So that's a huge, huge advantage. Disadvantages, technical problems might disrupt the online services. So for example, if the website goes down, obviously there's people working in the background, engineers and so on and so forth, trying to make sure that that happens as little as possible. If a business takes only this route, it might deter customers who are less technologically capable or who don't have access to the technology. I think that second point is a little bit moot these days. I think pretty much there's very few people that don't have access to technology because there's very few people these days that don't have a mobile phone. But certainly there's still parts of society that are not big fans of using the technology and would far rather go and talk to a person, look at the product and, go and do it in an actual shop. Security, hackers, theft of personal data. The security and hackers, we already mentioned with CAM, potential threat there, so similar idea. Theft of personal data has become a huge thing in the last couple of years. We had it with Optus, and we had it with Medibank, and there's been some other less high-profile businesses as well. But hackers stole personal customer data of, I think, hundreds of thousands of customers from those two businesses. That became a huge issue for them. It had lots of different ramifications. I think people possibly, if you're with Medibank, for example, you might go, oh, I'm not going to stay as a customer with you. I'm sure they lost lots of customers through those things. So that's a huge issue. And there obviously now is a big focus on the security of these systems to make sure that does not happen again. And then finally, there are the costs associated with developing and maintaining the platform. These websites and these platforms are pretty, they're pretty, what's the word I'm looking for here? They're very complex these days, very sophisticated. So there'll be lots of technical and engineering people in the background sort of looking after maintaining and updating them. And there's obviously a cost to that. And of course, even you could throw in the cost of the security now, because obviously be a lot more people looking at that aspect of these websites as well. So just stuff to be aware of there. Now, finally, just going to go back. If you think about what the study design said, it said strategies to improve both the efficiency and effectiveness of these strategies. Okay, so I haven't done it specifically yet. So I'm just going to go back now and do this. Now we've covered all the other the aspects, the explanations and the advantages and disadvantages. Now, most of what we're about to talk about isn't necessarily new. It's kind of almost restating what we've already got, but it's just putting it in a different context so that you're able to answer questions which specifically ask you about the impact of these technologies on the efficiency and effectiveness, which is now how they're often worded. And it means you have to answer the questions in a specific way. So now we've got an understanding of these technologies. Now we're going to frame it in such a way as you can answer these specific types of questions. Now, first off, I'm going to reduce it a little by automated production lines and robotics. I'm going to do just one because, as I said before, they're very, very similar, and really their impact on efficiency and effectiveness is the same. So you could use this to answer either or those two strategies. So in terms of efficiency, I'm not going to read that out to you there. And again, when you note that down, you'll notice that there's nothing really new there. We've kind of talked all about that, kind of probably mainly in the advantages section of automated production lines, robotics. But the key here, because the question asks what is the impact on either efficiency, effectiveness, or both, it's really important in your flow of explaining that you end up at efficiency, or in the right hand case, effectiveness. Because what I'm saying is, if you are asked the impact of something on efficiency, you need to relate it back specifically to efficiency. So that's why I've highlighted in orange, and you'll see that through this section, the term efficiency. Don't just leave it. Okay, so all we're doing there is explaining how this technology impacts efficiency and effectiveness, but just finishing that explanation with, therefore contributing to an increased efficiency. Therefore, this is an increase in effectiveness. Hopefully you understand what I mean. And as we go through each of these, you'll see I've done the same thing. So CAD reduces the time and labor required to design, blah, 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 blah. And then at the back end, hence increasing efficiency. So that you are actually answering what has been asked. You need to relate it back to efficiency, effectiveness. So again, effectiveness, multiple versions, prototypes, blah, 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 blah. These are likely objectives for a business. Hence, this is an increase in effectiveness. And again, the same for each of these. So I'm not going to talk through these. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. We've already looked at these. So pause the video and get these noted down. But really, really important, as I keep saying, to come back, finish off with efficiency and effectiveness. AI, exactly the same. And again, with online services. Okay, so always bring it back to what you're being asked. Otherwise, you're not going to score full marks. And these types of questions are increasingly common these days. Okay, so just summing up, what do we now need to be able to do? Okay, so with each of those 6 strategies, what you now need to be able to do is kind of describe the strategy. We had a bit of a description of each of them there. Discuss some advantages and disadvantages. And remember, maybe when you're creating your notes for this, maybe bring some of them together. Do this in a way that's best for you. But remember, there's a lot of repetitiveness across those advantages and disadvantages through those 6 strategies. So it's not 6 distinct lists of advantages and disadvantages, because there's so much, or so many of those that are common across multiples. And then finally, that we just had there, explain the effect that it can have on the efficiency and the effectiveness of the business. And that is it. Okay, quite a long one, quite a lot of notes, but like I said, a lot of repetition. Hopefully you understood all of that. If you're not understanding any of that stuff, obviously ask your teacher. And that's it. I'll see you in the next video where we're talking about materials strategies. I will see you then. Cheers for now.